In general, creative types fall into two camps. The first camp loves the excitement of creating something flashy, things that people can identify, experience, and viscerally respond to. The second camp is made up of those who care about building a foundation so that other people can create great things upon it. If they do their jobs really well, their work may go relatively unnoticed, but that's okay with them. They can sit back and smile knowing they helped other creators do their best work. Tony Minasali, the founder and CEO of SignalWire, describes the satisfaction that comes with building a strong foundation to help developers do what they do best.
There's not a lot of effort to empower developers, which is our customer. We care about developers, and they have a lot of cool ideas, and we want them to be able to take the buffet of all the cool stuff that we've built and arrange it their own way, like art almost.
In some ways, focusing on building a foundation isn't glamorous work. But without the foundation of a home, for instance, there is no home. For those dedicated to building new infrastructure, their vision is immense and game-changing when realized. Homes and entire cities are built because people put in the work to build the foundation first. In the technological world, similar groundwork is needed for others to build upon it. And there are levels to all the different kinds of technology that gets created. It's one level to make a program or an application. It's another to build a network. And it's a whole other stratosphere to seek to change an entire industry. On this episode of IT Visionaries, Tony explains how SignalWire is creating telecom software that will ultimately lead to telecommunications network based entirely on the internet. Of course, to get there, it takes a lot of different developments, pieces of the foundation that will eventually change the entire telecommunications industry, and we'll get to that too. Enjoy this episode.
IT Visionaries is created by the team at mission.org and brought to you by Salesforce Platform, the #1 cloud platform for digital transformation of every experience. Innovate fast, empower every employee, and scale with confidence from anywhere with a customer at the center of everything you do. Learn more at salesforce.com/platform.
Welcome everyone to another episode of IT Visionaries, and today we have the founder and CEO of SignalWire, Tony Minasali. Tony, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, right out the gate, tell our audience, what is SignalWire and what does it do?
So SignalWire is the implementation of software-defined telecom. It is the developer network that allows you to create quickly voice over IP, video, text applications without having to provide your own infrastructure, which is really the hardest part of any kind of app of that type.
So, right out the gate, a lot of times in tech, it's very easy to compare a company to another company. You guys actually do it you guys do it on your website, direct comparison to Twilio. So I believe Bandwidth is another player in this space. Is that accurate? Like you're a platform very similar to Twilio and Bandwidth. And we know, of course, we'd love to know if so, how are you different?
Yeah, it's the same category. So back in the early days, I used to work on exclusively open source, right? So I spent a lot of time, I'm an engineer. I was trying to build products and I was dissatisfied with what there was. So I created a project called FreeSwitch, which is an open source implementation of a telecom stack written completely in software. Kind of the catalyst for the entire industry. Many large players, including Bandwidth and Dialpad or Vonage, Five Nines, all early adopters of my technology. So, one of the things that really kind of drove me forward on my vision was I was trying to simplify it because some of those companies spent a long time implementing stuff, because it's a Wild West back then. So, in the early days, Twilio was not Twilio quite yet or very early. It had a voice over IP developer community, all hung out in the same circles. Twilio actually uses some of the software I worked on in my early career internally. So our industry has a lot of people that know each other and work together in different areas. So at the commercial level, SignalWire is capable of doing things similar to those. But the bigger goal is to stretch things out more, to make more functionality and simplify application development even further. There's kind of everyone has their niche focus. Like Bandwidth is mostly worried about telecom at the carrier level. They're a very good carrier who went public and, is trying to expand on that model. And Twilio was a early CPaaS winner. They kind of took the lead in the industry by creating control over what we call the PSTN, the nerdy term for the phone network that we all use every day when we call each other on our cell phones. And so, SignalWire is capable of doing those things, and we do sell stuff like that, sending SMS programmatically and phone calls and stuff. We have a lot bigger vision in how that programming is controlled, bringing more real-time aspect to it, building a developer community to continue the worldwide success we had in the open source side, and to create functionality that takes it to another level, including like integrating what we would call the existing CPaaS and the future of it, which involves, there's all these acronyms. I actually hate them all. CPaaS is one of them. The other one's UCaaS, Unified Communications as a Service. Yep. That makes me laugh because Unified Communications was never achieved. So I don't know how we're still doing it as a service. But that's what we call it. And we create the building blocks for those kinds of things so that if you are a company and wants to create an application, you can go and use our technology. And ideally, you can create your app with the least amount of, you put all of your effort into like the part that makes your app interesting to your customers and not like the boring part, the infrastructure to make it scale and all that kind of stuff. So that's like in a nutshell, the reason that it's the progression of a lot of years of, careful work going all the way down to the lowest level of some of this technology that would probably bore most people to tears if I started talking about it too much.
Well, what's interesting about what you said is, the marketplace has adopted, we've already adopted using the internet as a form of communications on the consumer level, right? It's in every single application just about where you can communicate with somebody, and we understand these are built on the rails of products like SignalWire. To a layperson like myself, if I'm out in, like I just was out in El Salvador, and I send my mom a text, it gets there. Like it's pretty epic. Whatever tool I'm using, it happens in a split second. Talk a little bit about where are the innovations coming from? Because on the surface level, it does seem like every tool can kind of do the core functionality, which is get a video call from A to B, get an SMS from A to B, get a text record from A to B. Like that seems like that's already here. And you were talking about some really cool innovations that you guys are pursuing. What is going to be unlocked in your opinion what is the company striving to unlock in the future of this type of communications? Or is it more on what the user will experience, or is it more on how easy it will be to integrate into future applications?
A lot of it has to do with the decentralization of the technology. So imagine put something in a simpler paradigm like printing. You used to have to go pay someone and go have a giant printing press and someone would print your picture for you. And then all of a sudden there's Kinko's. Well, that's kind of cool. I just go to Kinko's and they simplified it for me. And then next thing you know, I can get this really cool laser jet that prints the same thing that Kinko's used to make me go pay the money for. And I just buy the printer myself. So as we progress, we try and simplify things and to decentralize them. So you didn't have one, big printing industry that would force everyone to pay more and go in one place. A lot of people want to control their own technology and deploy things. So similarly, the telecom networks of the early days had, multiple times monopolies where they were broken into pieces because they started just buying each other until they owned all of it. So that infrastructure for telecom has been held on to for dear life by a lot of companies. So when you want to do something like sending a text message for a long time, that's going through, arcane telecom network stuff that's actually been around for a really long time, but it's kind of you can't even fathom how to set that up for yourself. If you want to have your own instance of this kind of stuff. So the real key is that when you have your own ideas to do things, you want to be able to have a space where you can create your own resources and have you might want to make an app where only your cohorts are allowed to see each other and call each other and those kinds of things. And that doesn't exist because most of the cool tools we take for granted are all at the consumer level. So there's not a lot of effort to power developers, which is our customer. We care about developers and they have a lot of cool ideas, and we want them to be able to kind of take the buffet of all the cool stuff that we've built and arrange it their own way, like art almost.
And you mentioned earlier that this journey started in open source. Is that accurate?
Yes.
So what made you were obviously making code, putting it out for public consumption. People could make modifications and improvements on what you had already suggested. What made you decide to turn it into its own company? Because, you went from open source to saying like, hey, I want to build SignalWire. I'd love for you to explain that journey of that decision process.
So that's part of my whole vision, starting from, I released the open source project and I started coding it in 2005. It's written in C. It's like several million lines of C code compiled together. The early version was a lot smaller than that, but I got the core done. And the idea was to make a cross-platform software that would turn a computer into a telecom device. And that's what we call software-defined telecom, where we were trying to remove the specific physical layer. There would be a different hardware device for every aspect of telecom. You install it physically and you have to plug those exact wires in and everything. So the idea was like, let's turn computers into communication switches. So I was working on that for at least a year before we released it as an open source. And one of the reasons we do that is because we like to, I have a big background in Unix and I like doing things transparently. So building all that software in the early days is a way to accelerate also. Like I spent, when I go back now, we put our project in GitHub. We started long before there was a GitHub. And when we did, I started looking at the stats on it and could see the crazy amount of endless code I was doing. So I got really obsessed with it because of the pursuit of my real vision, which was what we're doing at SignalWire. But you can't really solve that problem completely in open source when you're just kind of yourself. And I had like a maximum of the core founders of the project with me who have been with me forever. There's only 2 other people. So it was 3 of us. And then we at max had 10 people around us that were actually kind of focused. And, open source communities have input, people do patches and stuff. It's a lot of work. Just accepting other people's patches is a full-time job. So when you're doing open source and you're not really building a commercial entity around it, you're not like the funding for it is all volunteer. Sometimes you get people to pay you to make certain features and stuff like that, but it's like a different world. It's academic. It's similar to like doing college research. You're building it for the sake of building it, not because you're trying to make money. When you get to the stage where, let's say, like what I designed and worked with my team to build it on the open source side became ubiquitous, and it was very flexible because you never knew what everybody would want. Like one man's bug was another one's feature. It's like there'd be people, you change something, half of them would get mad, and you change it back, and the other half get mad. So you have to build a configuration choice to make both possible, and that kind of stuff. It went on for a really long time. We had a large community and physical conferences once a year where everyone came and demonstrated all the cool stuff they're trying to build with the rest of the open source telecom. There's a bunch of other projects. And like my idea when I built FreeSwitch was that I wanted it to be a cog in a more powerful thing, so like I always compare it to like Voltron, which you have to be kind of old to remember Voltron, but like
I remember Voltron. That was like the cartoon of when I was a kid. I remember watching it all the time.
So I always think of like SignalWire is like Voltron, where FreeSwitch is just like one of the parts, like the leg that combines into Voltron. So in order to make SignalWire, I had to do FreeSwitch first. I wouldn't say I necessarily knew I was going to make SignalWire while I was making FreeSwitch, but it was in my head. Stuff in your head is always foggy when you're trying to bring it to life. So what really happened was the internet wasn't super fast when I started FreeSwitch. So voice over IP was cool, but you had to have a data center to use it, because you couldn't just, most home users couldn't even use it because it's like really slow internet for home. So our servers would live in the internet. We'd make interesting, trunking and SIP trunking, and this really like kind of, there's a whole bunch of people who really love all this stuff, and they're very niche, I think, because it's like a lot of details and configuring and pointing stuff. It's just more internet protocols, just like HTTP is for the web browser. There's SIP, which is the phone equivalent of that. So we had to build, stuff for that. But what I really wanted to do was combine them all then into this kind of Voltron thing. So in order to do that, that's when it's important to start a company, because I can't garner random people who all are trying to solve their own problems. It's community guardian and open source. You can't say like, here, help me build my exact vision. They're like, no, I'm trying to fix my own bug. Here's a patch for it and that kind of stuff. So like there's a line where in order to do it, I had to bring in staff and other visionaries that I learned to meet, like all their skills, talking to them for years, people that I thought that would be the right team to do it, and I have to pay them. So really, like, there's a point where innovation must be driven by a commercial entity. So like maybe I could have gotten FreeSwitch to be sponsored by some corporate entity that wanted something, and then I could, work with them and build a product together. Or I could do that, be our own corporate sponsor, right? So
yeah,
did it kind of backwards. We started a giant open source project, enabled the entire world to, I mean, like, there's a whole bunch of really popular use cases on FreeSwitch that could go on forever. And like the dollar amount of some of the exits with just companies that use FreeSwitch is measured in billions of dollars, right? So like we hit this point, like, how are we going to do it? So let's start the company. The company will foster the open source project and it will use it to build the rest of the vision. So there's a lot more to SignalWire than where FreeSwitch, ends. There's a lot more to SignalWire in general is a set of goals, and that's kind of the reasoning.
What are some of the core things that you thought to yourself, hey, because you made a great point. Hey, when it's open source, you can't really control who's contributing and what they're contributing. You will go private and say, well, we're going to create a private company that's going to generate its own revenue. We're going to focus on some of the features and projects that SignalWire is more interested in. When you first started doing that, what were some of the projects that you wanted to take on? What were some of the features that you knew that you wanted to ship? Because, I can understand you're coming from a developer's point of view. You mentioned it's for developers so that they can implement these communication technologies into their core apps, not have to worry about the infrastructure, so their core apps can be more, however they envision it, really, and build it on the back of SignalWire for comms. What were you thinking right out the gate that you said, hey, this is going to be something that's going to be helpful right now? Because you mentioned already, you also saw your competitors who were already building their technology stacks. So you saw an opportunity. I'm curious what the first wave of features you focused on were and why'd you choose those?
Yes, that's a critical decision of strategy. When you're a scrappy new company, just because our technology enabled all these juggernauts doesn't make us equal to them yet, right? Yeah. Brand new company, little seedling. We decided the first thing we should do is create our distributed network, building software nodes. We use stuff like Docker in order to deploy, repeatable nodes that we can put all over the world. And that infrastructure, the first version of that, we worked very quickly on. And then we made basically compatibility layers with some of the existing APIs that already existed, because, you have to start somewhere. And rather than trying to sell a brand new paradigm to people, I compare this to like the evolution from the Walkman to the iPhone, right? So there's two lessons there. One is before there was an iPhone, there's a device that was amazing. It's a little handheld computer. It's insane that it could exist as early as it did. And everyone looked at it and threw it over their shoulder. And one reason was because the internet didn't connect to it very easily.
Yeah.
And no one realized that they needed a handheld computer. Like, I already have a computer on my desk. What is this stupid little computer for? So like sometimes when you do really cool ideas and spring them on the world in 1 second, like they actually get confused by it. So, the Walkman was an obvious extension of the hi-fi stereo system. And then everyone was like, Walkmans are cool, but what if it was CDs instead? And then like, what if it was like files? And then they made like a MP3 player. We all had probably 10 of those in a box somewhere for playing with those in the like late 90s or something. And then it keeps getting better. And then how about the iPod? It's Apple's version of that. And they simplified it with the menu where you just touch it with your thumb. And like, why don't we just have a screen?
The wheel. People love the wheel.
Yeah. And they're like, well, the screen might as well have a phone in it too. And then like, oh, what if the phone ran apps? So this progression was necessary and potentially even strategized on, rather than just, ta-da, here's an iPhone on day one. Everyone would think they didn't need it. But slowly, not only is that intelligent as far as like a strategy to make people understand it, but also you keep selling every iteration to the entire world. So obviously, there's a lot of upside to doing that, so you can fund the development of the next thing you're building, So we started out making, say, like APIs that were compatible with Twilio, for instance. Mm-hmm. So if you already wrote the code and you wanted to write some stuff on SignalWire, you could use your existing knowledge rather than having to learn something new. But simultaneously we were working on, the evolution of that. But that is a longer journey. It's taking each year we have more and more innovation. We didn't start with video, for instance. We had maybe the capability for video on the day we started the company, but it wasn't necessarily easy to just go make video APIs in 2 seconds. So we kind of scrapped our way through and raised some funding rounds in Silicon Valley and that kind of stuff so that we could, grow the company. We started with there was 3 people in the room. And we said, let's start SignalWire, and now we're at 70. So
nice.
As we go every day, how do we do it? We get some money, we hire some people, we try and make some products, we try and throw more. So yeah, we're doing this evolution, and the whole time we're just trying to stay committed to empower developers, which is what we are. We really love developers. Our open source project is used all around the globe. We know how they think. We like to make sure that we make them have the tools they need. But meanwhile, even further goal is as those developers build stuff on our network's getting used more, the capabilities required become bigger, and that allows us to simplify it further so that we, transition slowly into being a telecom network that uses it completely on the internet. So that's our real goal, which is going to take a while, but we're working really quickly towards it, and the internet is the catalyst for it. And we have just hit the precipice of 5G. So, with that, now every mobile device will have at least a couple 100 megabits of data stream. They're promising us a gigabit. I don't know if a saturated area really is going to do that, but we only need 4 for a really good video call. For 8, we can have an impeccable video call, and for 15, we can have a 4K video call. So, we're already if it's even a quarter of its promise of 5G, mobile devices will have no problem doing all kinds of cool interactive video stuff. So every app in its uncle are going to have video support in them. You'll start seeing a world where when you visit someone's website or their app or something, you'll just appear, just like we're talking to each other right now. You're just browsing Target, and the Target worker will come on. Did you need something? I see you've been searching around. Where you press the help button and a person appears. So those are things that we always I've seen commercials kind of mock that up, it's not real, but they pretend it is for the sake of the commercial.
Yeah,
that's all real now. So we make developers able to build that. And that's kind of what we're doing. So we just keep kind of iterating in that same fashion. As we, get closer to the future, we start adding even more.
If I'm a young developer, how it imagines, because we know, the audience of IT visionaries, some of it's more senior people, some of it's more entry level, younger developers, if you will, or younger people first in the coding and tech. If a young developer were thinking about building their own application and needed to integrate a communications platform, what do you think they would notice different about SignalWire, how you guys approach things versus some of the other offerings in your field? How do you guys mentioned before, you're very developer centric. Tell me what that means.
So it's a combination of really good timing with your own instincts versus the feedback of actual people. So that's always the problem when you're making APIs, because the developer who's making the APIs is also a developer. So it's like a developer making stuff for other developers. So is that developer designing it for themselves or for the other person? And you always have these is this for you or the imaginary user who's going to use it later? And in some cases, you have to turn that back and forth. So if I'm making something that only I need to use, I probably shouldn't think about the usability of everybody else. But if I am thinking about usability of everybody else, I should make sure that I have instinct from my own experience combined as much as possible with what other people actually, the feedback we get from it. So, I don't know how exactly different from every other developer we are. We're pretty similar because we are developers. I think that maybe as a company, we take it a lot more to heart than some do because I'm a tech founder, right? So I'm not just some business guy that thought of a cool idea to make a company and went and hired a bunch of people to build stuff. I built stuff too.
Yeah.
I still help build stuff. I'll go talk to the product people. So in the culture of the company is make your life easier for other people, which is the whole point of developers. That's why we call the user, where that's that person that's going to end up having to work with the software. So we're always there to make them happy. So I think that we bring that, we take that pretty seriously, and we have kind of a community vibe due to our upbringing. So, we have a really huge Slack community, like literally signalwire.community in a web browser will get you into our Slack, and there's like thousands of people in there, and they ask each other questions about what they're doing in Signalwire and stuff. We're big on storytelling. We really believe in that, passing on and helping people through. Like when you experience something that was really challenging, it's really nice to tell someone else how to shortcut through that. Because instead of 100 people wasting their time going through the same problem, if you solve it for them all, then they'll hit a new problem. Now you've given all 100 of those people like a new problem to solve. So that's kind of the way we roll with development stuff. And we listen to people and they chat with us, and then we get inspired and we keep kind of build the product that way. So the buzzword for that is product-led growth. I hate buzzwords, like I said, but I had a whole blog series about how I wanted to take back some of the buzzwords, because I always hate when I just sound, especially stuff I've been doing for years, it just comes up with buzzwords someday. Like, oh, well, I guess there's at least a name everyone else will understand, but it's like I hate even saying them sometimes. But yeah, that's kind of like the industry term for what we do is product-led growth. It's like we care about what other people are asking us for and stuff.
No, we've come like full circle in our conversation, because we started with, in tech, people always want to, it's very hard for people to conceptualize something they don't understand, right? So they always want to bring it to something else they know. And that's like generally most people's first instincts. And then so when you just spoke about how you don't like buzzwords, that's exactly what competitors and new entrants into the fields, and like you kind of hinted at it, when there's maybe well-financed companies, but they're not developer-centric, because they know the buzzwords, they just hook into them. And then when you're a consumer, and let's say you don't know the difference between Signalwire and someone else, then you're kind of stuck, because you're like, oh, this company says it's A, and this company also says it's A. Well, A and A are the same. They must be the same. That's what ended up happening for most people.
Yes.
So when you think about the future of what you're doing, I mean, it sounds pretty awesome. I'm curious, because this is something that's come up with other companies that rely on the infrastructure of others. So for example, Signalwire doesn't own cell phone towers, doesn't own the lines in the ground, doesn't, traditional telcos tend to own that. Do you ever see a place where they'll say like, hey, all these software companies are making it easier to use our rails, but we're not getting any more fees.
Mm-hmm.
We need to get more fees. And they come after people like you and they say, hey, Signalwire, you're doing all this stuff on my stuff, but hey, guess what? My stuff has costs, so you need to pay me more. Do you see a conflict arising? Because there's more and more companies leveraging, of course, the network infrastructure, the hard assets of other companies.
Yes. So sucks to be a telecom company in the traditional sense, because you're literally trying to cannibalize yourself and you're trying to choose the pace at which you do it so that you don't waste money. So you're like, I'm going to end up losing similar to the MP3 industry, right? Like everyone learned a lesson from that, because they're like, screw MP3s, are going to arrest you for using them and stuff. And I'm like, oh wait, we could sell them for $1 each. Like I guess we should have did that instead of like causing all this commotion, because most people would rather pay $1 than go pirate songs. What? They're only $1. I'll get one right now, or $15 a month now for all music. So that's where it went from this industry. So the same thing is happening with telecom. They hate phone lines. All telecom providers hate the fact that they have phone lines to subscribers, but they represent this legacy revenue that you can't say goodbye to in 1 second. So you got to kind of hope they never realize it. So many people probably have like a landline at their house that doesn't even ring, because everybody in the house has their own cell phone and no one calls your house anymore, but they still pay the bill because it seems weird not to have a phone.
Yeah.
Some people maybe have learned that and don't have a phone anymore, but other ones do. And they're like trying to keep that rolling as long as possible, because that's the extra money. So then the only way to fix it is to kind of defeat themselves at some point. So they'll go around and work with new startups and stuff like that. And maybe if they find the one that's going to kill them, at least they could own part of it, or they'll have a heads up and they can kind of copy the same idea or whatever. So there's a big dilemma. I'd hate being a telecom right now if I was running that instead of Signalwire. So I would be wasting a lot of time worrying about that all the time, I think. But what I see is happening is that they don't want to have phone calls through phone lines. Nobody wants it. And that's good, because I want it to go away also. But we're going to translate it to the internet. like all those providers and those utilities will only care about the internet. Because if you look at stuff like Starlink, which is the ability to get satellite internet that doesn't suck. There used to be HughesNet where it was like 1 megabit and it was like 200K up and you can't even watch Netflix on it. And but now Starlink is like 300 megabits to a satellite dish. You put it on your roof and then all of a sudden you have this internet infrastructure link that you can now, cord cut and then watch Netflix and Hulu on it. And now you don't need a satellite cable anymore. So say goodbye to those guys.
Yeah, you don't need that. You don't need that line dug to your house, that old school line.
Yeah. So the satellite cable companies are like, oh crap, we better figure out how to sell internet instead or something else, because no one's going to want to, download TV in a streaming format when you could just, that internet is like bi-directional. Also, I can talk out it and, we can have conversations like this through it. So all providers will care more about the internet first, especially the mobile ones, because they have like really fast 5G going, and 5G doesn't necessarily only have to be your cell phone. They're starting to make products where you just like stick a thing in your window and it kind of just pulls it out. So we're going to increase the networking capability of the internet. I think that will stop anyone from getting mad at me about we're doing telecom stuff, because it'll be like, good riddance to this telecom stuff. I just want to sell internet to everybody. And then the telecom will just be apps inside of your phone rather than like the phone is not, you're not getting phone service anymore. You're only getting internet service. And then you buy the phone service from different vendors through the internet. So the internet will be the only thing they care about and what they charge for.
Yeah, I like the way you phrase it, because so even if it's the telco only focuses on internet, they still have the same dilemma, which is they have to continue to maintain a huge infrastructure and support structure that has tremendous bandwidth. And we're, like the Pandora's box is open. We're not going back. We're not going to accept lesser speed ever again, right? Every application now depends on faster, more blazing connectivity and speed. So they're going to have to continually build their infrastructure networks. And then they'll probably build to overcapacity. So then they need people like SignalWire to get more apps to fill that capacity so they can get the utility out of it. So it is, to your point, they're their own worst enemy at this point.
Yeah.
Tony, it's been a lot of fun having you on the show. But before you go, it's time for the lightning round. The lightning round is brought to you by the Salesforce platform, the #1 cloud platform for digital transformation of every experience. And Tony, this is where we ask you questions outside of the world of work, so that our audience can get to know you a little bit better. You ready?
Okay.
All right. Right away, we noticed on your LinkedIn that it looks like you are a guitar player. How long have you been playing?
Since I was 6 years old, which is a long time.
How would you describe your guitar skills?
Good enough.
What's your favorite songs to play?
Pink Floyd, blues, Beatles.
Before you were developing your open source FreeSwitch solution, did you develop anything prior to that on your own?
So my early career, I made web server stuff. So I didn't build it from scratch like I did with FreeSwitch, but I took like the Apache web server, which was an early open source project, and made modules for it and created a web hosting platform as part of my job.
Nice. When you're not working on SignalWire, not playing guitar, what else do you do for fun?
Sit quietly.
Are you a meditator?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I don't have incense or anything, but I do like to sit and think. When you become a CEO, there's like a hazing you have to go through because everyone's laughing because they know how hard it is. So it's like, it's not a job. There's two ways to become a CEO. One is being really good at it and then getting hired because you already went through this painful process, or appointing yourself CEO of your own startup, which is what I did. So, trial by fire, you learn to deal with the ups and downs and stop just sitting there doing nothing. Is sometimes my favorite sport.
I think a lot of people can relate to that. Well, Tony, it was great having you on today's episode of IT Visionaries. Thanks for sharing your background in open source, what you're doing at SignalWire, and how you are building a developer-centric application for mobile application communications. I don't want to use any of the buzzwords because you already said you don't like the buzzwords, but it was awesome hearing some of the things that you're looking to do and some of your, your major priorities being that developer-centric product. Developers for developers. I really liked hearing some of the stories you told, and I always think about what is going to be unlocked with this type of utility. It's hard to imagine sometimes because we think that we're already there, but who knows? The imagination of developers out there can take this anywhere.